At Methodist Healthcare Ministries, we are broadening the definition of healthcare because we know that health is more than what happens at a doctor's office. Your health is affected by the things you eat, the water you drink, and the environment where you live, work, play, and pray. Visit MHM.org to learn more.
Advocacy happens year-round, and now is the time to get involved and make sure your voice is heard. Go to raiseyourhandtexas.org to find out how you can join our efforts to make sure Texas lawmakers hear and respond to our teachers' priorities.
At Methodist Healthcare Ministries, we are broadening the definition of healthcare because we know that health is more than what happens at a doctor's office. Your health is affected by the things you eat, the water you drink, and the environment where you live, work, play, and pray. Visit MHM.org to learn more.
Advocacy happens year-round, and now is the time to get involved and make sure your voice is heard. Go to raiseyourhandtexas.org to find out how you can join our efforts to make sure Texas lawmakers hear and respond to our teachers' priorities.
At Methodist Healthcare Ministries, we are broadening the definition of healthcare because we know that health is more than what happens at a doctor's office. Your health is affected by the things you eat, the water you drink, and the environment where you live, work, play, and pray. Visit MHM.org to learn more.
Advocacy happens year-round, and now is the time to get involved and make sure your voice is heard. Go to raiseyourhandtexas.org to find out how you can join our efforts to make sure Texas lawmakers hear and respond to our teachers' priorities.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to see a full house here in our Studio 919 in downtown Austin. We'd love to get started here, so just encourage folks to grab some iced tea and take a seat so we can get started with the program. Welcome to those joining us in person here in Austin, and for those joining us online for our conversation with Texas Comptroller Glenn Hegar following this afternoon's release of the budget revenue estimate for the 2025 legislative session. My name is Matt Ewalt. I serve as Senior Director for Events and Live Journalism for the Texas Tribune. Our program today is going to run an hour, with 45 minutes of moderated conversation and 15 minutes of Q&A. Now, we have a full house here, and with the size of our in-person audience, and so that we can get to as many questions as possible, we're going to be doing all of our Q&A through our Q&A portal at texastribune.org/ask. texastribune.org/ask. In the back of the studio there, we have some QR codes as well so that you can submit your questions. We'll ask them on your behalf and get to as many questions as we can. We are grateful for the support of our sponsors. Our major sponsors for today's program are Methodist Healthcare Ministries, the Beer Alliance, Texas State Technical College, and Raise Your Hand Texas. Our supporting sponsor is Chemic and Strong PC. Though corporate sponsors and donors underwrite this event, they play no role in determining the content, speakers, or line of questioning. And a reward for those who arrived a little early and were able to grab a seat under a few seats here in the studio are some gift cards from Starbucks, which is the official coffee of the Texas Tribune's 2025 Texas Legislature event series. So go ahead and you can reach down there and see if you can find it. We do thank Starbucks for providing coffee at these upcoming events to power us through session. Thank you also to those all around. I know we have some no, I'm sorry, Matthew, there's none up there. But there's some wonderful enthusiasm, but let's go ahead and get to the program here. Thank you to all those around the state who make the journalism of the Tribune, including events like this, possible by becoming Texas Tribune members. To learn more and to become a member, visit texastribune.org/support. And as the 2025 Texas Legislature gets underway, we'll be busy here in our downtown Austin studio hosting conversations with lawmakers and other Texas leaders for perspective and insight as to what's going on. Our biweekly 2025 Texas Legislature series features Representative Jean Wu, incoming chair of the Texas House Democratic Caucus, at 8 a.m. next Tuesday here in Austin and online to discuss priorities for the Democrats this session. And on Tuesday, February 4th, we're joined by Senator Charles Perry, chair of the Senate Committee on Water, Agriculture, and Rural Affairs, talking water infrastructure and other legislative priorities. You can learn more about these and other Tribune events around the state at texastribune.org/events. And lastly, I want to share the great news that Tribcast is back as a limited run series during the 2025 legislative session. The weekly political podcast hosted by Matthew Watkins, James Barragan, and Eleanor Klibanoff, and featuring a rotating cast of editors, reporters, and other guests can be found online at texastribune.org/tribcast. And the first episode is already up. So let's get to today's program. Glenn Hegar was elected the 36th Texas Comptroller of Public Accounts in November 2014. He was reelected in 2018 and 2022. He is Texas's chief financial officer, the state's treasurer, check writer, tax collector, procurement officer, and revenue estimator. Before his election as Texas Comptroller, he served in the Texas House of Representatives and Texas Senate. Our moderator is Matthew Watkins, who served in his role as editor-in-chief of the Texas Tribune since September and has been with the Tribune since 2015. I thank the Comptroller for joining us on this busy day. And with that, I turn the program over to Matthew.
All right. Hello, thank you for being here.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, so you, I feel like, have had a pretty good run with your GREs the last few years. The big numbers this year, $194.6 billion in funds available for general purpose spending next biennium, and a ending balance, we sometimes like to call it a surplus, of $23.8 billion. Those are the top line numbers. What to you is the headline from the report that came out today?
Yeah, I think one of the most important parts that I had to kind of get back out and talk about is because 2 years ago, sitting up here, and as we were preparing for 2 years ago biennial revenue estimate, I was trying to think of how do you tell people that they're going to have $30+ billion, that it's unprecedented, it's historical, and I just didn't think those quite had the catch. And so finally, there was this little story which I'm on board with everybody today, and I came up with that once in a lifetime. And then as we were preparing for this session and realized that, wow, $24 billion, and then $24 billion roughly in the Economic Stabilization Fund, kind of, do I need to backtrack on that once in a lifetime verbiage that we used? But as I was telling some of my staff, and one of them had said, well, how we got here is different. And I think that's important to tell, and that's part of what we told today. That's part of what I'm going to tell the legislature, 2 years ago, kind of how we got to that point, which truly was, just unprecedented. Had never, ever happened in Texas history to have a cash carryover balance of that magnitude. Was how the economy just completely took off from what we expected coming out of COVID. Federal dollars coming to the state of Texas, like around the nation, right, wrong, or indifferent. And then there was a lot of additional monies because of record high 40-year inflation. So, if you bought an item that was $100 and you paid sales tax and now it was $110 or $120, believe it or not, 6 1/4 adds up on every $10 to $20 in purchase items. And so there were 3 factors while we got there. While the economy has continued to grow, a big piece of this is part of that economy growing, but really a big piece of it was budgeting practices of last legislative session. And so a lot of it continues to be a carryover from last session, even though the legislature did a lot of one-time expenses, whether it was adding additional dollars into water infrastructure, broadband infrastructure, higher education for those institutions that don't have a permanent university fund, such as the Tech, the U of H, the North Texas, the Texas state systems. So all of these different things, and property tax relief, all those combined, and they still had money left over. And so there's a different reason we got here, but one of the points that I try to make sure to tell people is it is a good position to be in where we're at today compared to look at a few of the other states where they're actually negative. So that is the biggest story of anything, part economy, part budgeting practice of last session.
Right. One of the things we noticed here was, $194.6 billion, actually a little bit less than what was in the report 2 years ago, but more than what the legislature actually chose to spend.
That's right. That's right. And one of the points that I want to continue to make to everybody is I just kind of, one day I was thinking about this because I kind of like to kind of tell where were we at, how did we get here, and I just kind of went back because I got to thinking about revenue numbers of 10 years ago when I first got in this role, and so I was looking at some of the data points, and I told my staff, I said, I really want to kind of make this point that even though this budget is very conservative in its revenue growth projections, not up to par of what we have historically had, but still positive. One of the points that I wanted to make is that when I came into this role, a monthly sales tax collection in a given month, which is 58% of all our tax collections is sales tax, was $2.4 billion. Well, right now, it's almost $4 billion. And so the point is, if you go 10 years ago, it was $29 billion. Now it's over $50 billion. So even with modest growth, it is a significantly larger base. And that does mean there's growth in the current budget, even though it's pretty conservative estimates on our part.
Right. And so let's dig in a little bit into this $23.8 billion, the ending balance, the surplus, things like that. That, as you mentioned, significantally less than last session.
Yes.
Significantly more than pretty much any other session.
Yes,
right.
Yes, any session in history other than the last one.
Exactly. But there are some different things about it, right? You mentioned earlier today about $4.5 billion of those dollars were money that were set aside, or that were appropriated contingent on the passage of some kind of school choice, school vouchers, ESA bill. That did not pass, so that carried over.
Yes.
The legislature, correct me if I'm wrong, could spend that on whatever they want, but of course, it would be hard to kind of explain how we were going to spend it on schools and we changed our mind, we're going to spend it on something else. And then you also have $7.3 billion in money in dedicated accounts that haven't been spent yet. That's money that we're saying, is that like water funds and things like that?
It's a wide variety of things, that revenues that may come into the Treasury for a specific purpose that either the legislature doesn't spend all the money on that specific purpose, which is the only thing they can spend it on, or maybe, for example, with emissions. There's certain dollars that come in for federal programs to make sure you try to reduce emissions in non-attainment areas, whether that's here in Austin or Houston or the Metroplex, San Antonio, El Paso, a few communities. But the fact is kind of the lower hanging fruit of what it can be spent on to lower emissions isn't there. And there are federal requirements of what you can and can't, so that fund balance kind of continues to grow. But the irony is, if you get rid of it, you get penalized on the federal level. So some of these, you're almost in a catch-22 that you can't get rid of them. And the legislature's trying to be prudent. You don't want to just spend it to spend it. You want to make sure you decrease emissions, which is the intended purpose. So the point being is sometimes the fund balance continue to grow for a variety of reasons. Other times it's because the legislature may, for whatever reason, doesn't spend it all on that purpose. Now, the money can't be spent on something else, but it can be used as a balancing mechanism of the overall budget. And so therefore the legislature at times when we didn't have a lot would use those dollars to balance and hope the economy grew better than what the controller had estimated. But in this case, typically I get a few questions from the legislature, so I've kind of learned just go ahead and put it in there, because I know a few that are going to ask me that question, so just go ahead and put it in earlier than not. And then also, whenever we gave the legislature an update last year, I went ahead and added in back that almost $4.5 billion that, as you mentioned, was appropriated. However, the enacting legislation didn't pass, so therefore that $4.5 billion didn't get put into the funding formulas for public education. Obviously, with only 9 months left, or not even quite, in this current school year, it's not all going to get spent in the public education system. So I added it back to the cash carryover balance, but I would imagine as the legislature goes in dealing with public education finance this session, as well as education savings accounts, I don't know exactly what they do, but I would assume that $4.5 billion is going to be added back into the budget in some mechanism for public education and maybe a plus factor. I don't know. We'll see when the introduced versions come out, but I do think that would probably go towards public education is my guess.
So if I take that 7.3 and that 4.5, subtract it from the 23.8, you get around 12. Someone shout at me if I am wrong on that. But am I incorrect then to view that kind of 12 million as a sort of unaccounted for surplus that could be used?
I think that would be an appropriate way to ask that question. Then there's also, when you look at, again, the overall balance includes growth from the last session to this session. Some of there's a reduction in federal funds, but an increase in state funds. And then also there's a percentage in the current budget that the legislature spent on one-time expenditures. And so therefore those dollars are going to potentially get freed back up for them to spend on something in addition to the dollars we're talking about.
Okay, I want to take a step back here and talk a little bit about how you came to this estimate, the work that goes into it and some of the assumptions.
Yeah.
Tell me about the process of coming up with this number.
Yeah, so my team typically, a couple things. One, we do our cash flow forecast for every single fiscal year. We work through that and make sure before the fiscal year starts in September of 1. So that kind of starts as a template of where we use. But then each person within revenue estimating within their specific area will go through all of their basic assumptions. The entire team will vet all of those, as in what are our assumptions, whether it's one sector of the economy, one sector of revenue coming in. We look at a wide range of data and information that is out there, where there's a lot of people that we subscribe to their economic modeling and data information. We look at a whole wide range of variable factors, scenarios, and so you take all of those different pieces and you put them together. And that not only gets each category of tax collections, but the entire piece. And so then there is a final number that everybody reads, but behind the veil, it is a significant number of moving pieces. And also an important part of that is talking to our sister agencies. Say, for example, Texas Education Agency, because depending on the school funding formulas, there can be either more or less depending on what the actual expenses were rather than the estimates that are in the current budget. And so all of these moving pieces right now, a big piece of it is we actually increased that revenue estimate there at the end of the year based on what we were going to give, because there were some additional dollars available that were in the ARPA COVID relief funds that can now be freed up and spent over in Texas Department of Criminal Justice, which is an eligible expense. So that frees up some general revenue and increase the revenue estimate.
And so in creating this estimate, you predicted smaller than average economic growth in Texas, for Texas, but predicted Texas to grow faster than the United States as a whole.
Typically, Texas has outpaced the national average This growth does not assume that historical growth. We think there's a variety of reasons. There may be more modest growth, but then also the fact is it's a large, healthy surplus, so therefore we can be a little more conservative in our estimate. One thing I learned as a revenue estimator when I was in the legislature, it's always better to be a little bit more conservative and the economy overperform, and we will update as we see that performance, than to be the opposite side. There's nothing worse than coming back in and having a budget deficit. But with that being said, there's a lot of uncertain factors in the economy. I would say that the worst part was obviously during the COVID restrictions, to where no one knew where the direction of the economy was going. And that was a real learning experience. But the point is, this is a conservative estimate overall compared to what it could be. But it's just trying to make sure that, the Texas economy is going to grow. We don't forecast a recession, and we just don't think it's going to quite grow in the next year or two at the same pace we have.
And you list, of course, you take pains to talk about that uncertainty, right? There's natural disasters,
Yes.
international events that could change things, and of course, domestic politics
That's
as well,
right.
particularly at the federal level. We have a new president coming in. There are arguments to be made for and against good economic
Right.
growth there, whether that's lower taxes under a Republican president, whether that's tariffs coming in. Texas
Right.
obviously relies a lot on international trade. Even questions around immigration and,
Right.
and things like that. How much did the incoming administration impact your predictions here? As
Yeah,
to whether-
that's not going to really, because we have to look at what the current law is, what is the current set of facts and scenarios and situations, and an incoming Texas legislature, while there may be a different mix of members coming in, or if it was a different governor, which it's not, but if you go to D.C., it is a different administration. There's a different makeup in the U.S. Senate. Well, with that being said, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. And so you're better off not trying to get too far ahead in those estimates. And two, policies, they're not just the flip of a switch. They take a while to implement. They take a while for that train to get moving, whatever that is. And so those are things that we monitor, things that we may take in as they change. But right now, that is not something. There's enough assumptions that are going into a revenue estimate that starts in 9 months and 2 years later it ends, much less to try to assume what you think Congress may or may not do in D.C. I can tell you, I stopped guessing what Congress did a long time ago.
Very good. Okay, another thing that I think grabbed a lot of people's attention in this report is the information you included about the Economic Stabilization Fund,
Right.
Rainy Day Fund. This, of course, established in the 1980s.
Yep.
An idea of understanding that a lot of our economy is based on the oil economy, which can have its swings, and you want to kind of set a little bit aside as a savings account in case things get bad. For the first time in history, it sounds like, at the beginning of the upcoming fiscal year, that ESF will be maxed out. We will reach the cap. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, because when the Economic Stabilization Fund was put in the 1980s, Texas had an oil bust. I mean, essentially, we had a large crisis in our state funding, and so the legislature, I still think it's very ironic that they create a state savings account, had a constitutional amendment, we're going to create this. Members of the public, we're never going to have this again. We're going to save for that rainy day. But oh, by the way, even though there's a crisis in the oil industry, companies are selling everything in the Permian Basin for pennies on the dollar. Texas is not going to be where it's at. Fast forward a few years later, we're going to import all this LNG. Now we're exporting LNG. We have all this capability in the oil and gas industry with new technologies and capabilities. And so, by the way, way back then, we're not going to have this again. And the revenue source is what? The industry that's not producing any more revenue, it's going to be the oil and gas industry. Now, how the hell was that going to work? The math didn't come out. So I'm picking on a few that'll say, oh, yeah, we knew it was going to. No, you didn't. Don't tell me that. That's a politician answer. The point is, it wasn't supposed to really have any money in it. It really wasn't. Fast forward, then fracking capabilities, the Permian Basin came alive, the Eagle Ford Shale, the Barnett Shale. And when I first got in this role, I used to go around and I would brag about, oh my gosh, I transferred $1 billion in severance tax collections to the ESF and an equal amount to transportation. Last year, it was $3 billion to each. This year, $2.7 billion. I mean, so this is significant revenues that are coming in as that portion that is dedicated. But now I went to the legislature when I got in this role. I mean, I was astonished. I remember like it was yesterday, I sat around the room with my team and I was asking, I said, okay, we got $6 billion plus in the Economic Stabilization Fund. How do we invest that money? And they said, well, we keep it in the treasury pool. And I said, no. What do we do with it? I mean, I was embarrassed. I served in the building for 12 years, and I never asked the question, how do you invest it? Because statutorily, we were required to keep it in overnight cash. I mean, and so I made the point. I said it was just like we took a shovel and dug a hole in the Capitol lawn and buried it. Now, don't go over there because it's really not there. The last thing I need is a Capitol full of holes tomorrow morning. You know, there was a movie about that. And so anyway, people are looking for the $24 billion. Don't go. It's not there. But it gave me the ability to go to the legislature, ask for more appropriate tools, more prudent ways to invest, responsibility for the taxpayer. And now, with such a large balance, I mean, we're literally earning over $1 billion in investment returns. And so the ESF, Economic Stabilization Fund, has to have, it has a cap constitutionally of a certain percentage as in relation to the budget. And now, because of the balance we have, but also because of the investment earnings, which is a success story, now almost every year in perpetuity, the funds that would have gone there don't get to because the cup is full based on that cap, that constitutional cap. And the funds flow back into the general treasury and they will stay there. And so I thought it was an important point that at least I should raise to the public, to the legislature, and just make the point. You know, it's a policy question. That's their domain. That's their job, not my job. But at least I'm the provider of facts and information and say, okay, well, if we continue and based on these assumptions, if they are correct, which assumptions are going to change, then by 2035, if the cap continues to be in place and we can't add any more money and they don't take money out, so therefore just based on those investment terms and those assumptions, the fund will probably grow to be about $40 billion. That's a lot of money. That's an increase from $24 billion. But if we were to remove the cap, which again, that's a policy question, that's a constitutional amendment, then that fund would grow to $80 billion. So, you know, that's not mine to decide. That's to the legislature, that's to the public. But I think that that's a question that at least we need to decide, what do we do? And knowing that the phoenix was rebirthed of the oil and gas industry, and at some point in time, the production is not going to be at the level that it's at. And so those resources that are being utilized, those are, in my opinion, not just the resources of me and you, of this generation, they're the resources of future generations. And so I think it's important, now whether they decide this session or a subsequent session, but I think it's just an important one to have a discussion about.
And so the choices that are kind of presented to the legislature in this world would be to kind of keep things the way they are.
Keep them where they are.
Which would mean essentially more, in good times, more general revenue to play with.
More every year. There's more.
Right.
I mean, there's going to be continuation of more revenues into the Treasury as long as the oil and gas industry continues to exist in Texas.
Right. Option 2 would be essentially to lift the cap and allow that to grow. What would be the benefits and drawbacks of a larger than the current cap?
Well, I think
fund?
what that means is if we were to go down that path, then obviously the bigger benefit is in the future years when the next recession hits, which it's not if, it's when. There's a lot of economists that guess when it is, they guess why it is. Nobody knows the date, nobody knows the issue, nobody knows how deep it's going to be. But when you have that reserve, which originally what it was designed for, is that then therefore you have the ability to tap into it, to ruffle out the decrease in revenues, continue to provide the services that people expect and demand, build roads, water infrastructure, whatever that may be. So you have a bigger tool in the toolbox. You got options for when that day happens. That's the benefit of that. The other benefit is with a larger economic stabilization fund, the investment returns are not just $1 billion, they're billions of dollars. Now that, and you know, just kind of like anything, the bigger it is, the bigger the domino effect, the snowball effect going future. Or the other option, as a question that I had, which I knew I was going to get asked the question, is you can also do tax cuts. Do you do cuts to that industry that are providing those tax resources? Do you do something else? And so I think, you know, I served in the building, and I know the legislature, they're going to ask all those questions and they're going to debate them, and that's their job to do.
Okay, so we've sort of summarized a lot of what's in the report, but I mean the big picture here, right, is that
it's great to be in Texas.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'd rather do my job here than somewhere else.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about.
I like that summary. I thought that was a good one.
Yeah, I mean, it is another year of deciding where to spend new money as opposed to deciding where you need to cut back because of necessary belt tightening.
Yeah, the first and foremost is compare and contrast of Texas versus some other states, where we're at a position. And we're very blessed to be in this position, but it also comes a responsibility. And it also means I've been in the legislature when we had no additional money. I've been in the legislature when we had less money. I've been in the legislature when we had additional money. Now, this makes for a tougher budgeting session. The best time is when you have no more money and you can just say, great idea, no. That's such a good idea. No. It made it easy. Where now, it's not so easy. But one of the things that I caution about is I don't want people to think this is the new norm. This is not the new norm, and that's the reason I make the point we're here because of different reasons. And so those balances will continue to go down, but the economy is going to continue to grow, which is a great thing.
Yeah, my first job in Bryan College Station, I covered Steve Ogden, the former Senate Finance Chair, and he used to.
Sorry, I almost lost my water when you said Ogden.
he used to talk about how he thought the lean years were easier because they didn't have to.
Well, I'll tell you a Steve Ogden story. I remember I was serving in the Senate, and we sat next to each other, and I'll never forget for the rest of my life. He came in and he slammed down the budget. He was so mad. I know you never saw that part of Steve Ogden. And he slammed the budget down, and I didn't know, should I ask, should I not ask? And finally, I think I was probably a freshman member, and I finally got the courage. I said, Chairman, what's the issue? And he was mad because the Comptroller just raised the revenue estimate because he had just finished with the budget. And he had all the signatures. And so I won't say what Steve said. So, now it's like I got to open the budget up. And so I realized then, when I became Comptroller, I make sure if I'm going to change the estimate, I talk to the chair of Senate Finance and House Appropriations first. So anyway, learned a good lesson that day.
There you go, yeah. And so you're no longer in the legislature. You don't have to do the hard job of telling people no when they know there's money available.
Did he just say I didn't have a hard job?
Well, I didn't say you have to do that hard job, yeah. But, I mean, you have an opinion.
Yeah, right. We all do.
Where do you see as areas of opportunity with this funding available for
I think important. Number one, they're going to have to pick back up off with the education discussions they had. I think that's really important, and we need to decide the path upon which we're going. One of the things that I've continued to advocate over the years, no matter what, is that we have to continue to invest in our infrastructure. I have said that. I know I sound like a broken record, but the fact is has anybody seen any roads that aren't congested? Any construction projects? And so, we've got to make there. Everybody assumes the water's going to run in the tap. We're growing every single day, 1,200 new people in the state of Texas. Every morning when you wake up, I challenge people that in a week, think about it tomorrow morning when you wake up on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday and Saturday and Sunday for a given week. And the point is, the reason I do that is because when you multiply 7 times 1,200 people a day, that's a large-sized city. That is a lot of infrastructure that has to be built. And so I've seen too many societies with history that gets off of the focus of their infrastructure. And then, lastly, I think is really important right now, and we did a report last year because I wanted to elevate the discussion at least of a topic point, same as I had done with pensions in the past, I had done with other things in the past, of looking at more than a 2-year but a lot longer runway, is affordability of housing in Texas. That is one that was an Austin issue, that was a Metroplex issue, and after COVID, it's become much more of an issue across the state. And so whether it is single family, whether it is multifamily, that's an issue that as we continue to grow, that worries me that if we don't take some real policy decisions, and I don't know exactly what they are, that wasn't the point of the report. The report was to elevate that discussion, that I think that can be a real economic issue for the state of Texas in the future.
Is that necessarily a spending issue, or is that a land use zoning reform issue?
I think it's more the latter, but obviously there has been some discussions, and I've talked to some folks. There could be some spending policy decisions that can play into that. That is like most issues. Most issues are pretty complex. That one is too. But I think that what are some of the lessons we can learn from other states that have been here and didn't quite make the right path, and you're not trying to throw a stone at them. It's just, a smart person learns from other people's mistakes, right?
Let's talk a little bit about tax cuts. It's hard.
I want to, can we skip that? Go to the next question.
It's hard to imagine seeing a $23.8 billion surplus and not seeing the leaders currently in place say some of that money needs to go to reducing property taxes.
That's right.
And
which, by the way, is not a state tax.
Right.
Just want to point that out. But anyway, yes, we continue to talk about property tax, but it is it comes back into play because of school finance, right? And because whether you live in a city, 50% of your property tax bill is ISD. That's not against ISGs. It's just a math issue, right? If you live in an unincorporated area, it's 2/3. So the state can move that lever by how it funds public education in cost shifting that balance. And so while it's not a state tax, that's the reason it comes back in discussion. But I do think the legislature will, and appropriately so, talk about should they attempt to provide tax relief or targeted relief in certain areas. And that should always be part of the discussion. I typically get asked a question by one group or another group or somebody that works here or somebody works there. Can they solve this issue? And, most of these issues are so big, like the state of Texas, that it's kind of like the old apple. You're not just going to take a bite and eat the whole apple. And especially with this breadth of issues, but you try to continue to solve one problem, one step, and tax cuts plays a role in that too. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm a homeowner in Austin. I saw my tax bill go up, considerably this year. Not, there were some local policy decisions that factored into that as well. But, you feel that, especially if you're a homeowner, a lot more than I think you feel the other taxes that you're paying in this state. So I understand the drive to do that. I do want to ask a sustainability question though, because we have seen the legislature take bites at that apple in recent sessions, 2019, last session, and everything like that. Often the move is to take general revenue funds and put it into school finance in order to allow those districts to buy down. But we're in a situation right now where the school districts are raising alarm about being in a difficult financial place. We're seeing schools close across the state, and that's in a period where there is a lot of money to spend. There will, if you're in this job for a long time, there will eventually become a time where you're not giving a big rosy GRE estimate.
Yeah, that's right.
What is it going to mean for the state? What is it going to mean for our schools in particular? To be in that situation, given the decisions that have been made in recent years?
Well, I think that's one reason that it is so important that we continue to be very focused on the policy decisions that are made to make sure that the economy continues to move in a positive direction. Once that plateau and decrease, then yeah, that's when you get into the very significant discussions because the economy is not continuing to grow. And those revenues don't continue to come in. That's in your own personal household. That's in a business. And so that's when the tougher decisions get really tough, right? Which is the issue. And I think, part of the point, in my opinion, we can kind of get way far out and I've got a little bit of gray hair now, so it gives me a little different perspective. And sometimes that I have been through some valleys and been over some mountains that you kind of realize that if you take a deep breath, try to make methodical decisions, try to realize that it's one step after the next. I'm looking at you, I'm looking down, and I see more cars stacking up out there. May say, oh my God, it's going to take me forever to get down to the river. Well, but stay focused on moving one step at a time. And I think that's the bigger picture that I try to make to the point. If we look too far out, you're going to get pretty scared and paralysis will set in. But you just got to methodically keep taking one step at a time.
Do you think this sort of cycle of using a big chunk of surplus funds every time to buy down property taxes, is that a sustainable option, or are we setting up difficult situation.
Well, I guess the way you pose the question, if there's not surplus funds, you don't have to worry about it. So I'll kind of answer it that way, kind of the way you pose the question. When there's not surplus funds, it's sure not, different questions arise, right?
Sure. Let's talk about water, another big issue that the legislature put in, with the support of the voters, then afterwards $1 billion toward a water fund. There are a lot of water needs in the state. I know Texas 2036 has put the number at $150 billion over the next 50 years. If you hear Charles Perry talk about this, he'll say the amount allocated last year was or I guess 2 years ago, or 2023. Now that we're in 20, was a drop in the bucket, right? And how much do you see that issue as being worthy of lawmakers' attention this session?
Yeah, I think water policy is an extremely important issue. I mean, when I was in the Senate, I focused a lot on that issue. It was very important to the Senate district that I represented, and very significant to the state. So when I do tours, I do a couple tours on various issues every single year of important issues to the state of Texas. Water was one we recently did last year, if I recall. And so point is, I'm trying to elevate and continue in that discussion that if you look at a state that's growing 1,200 people a day, half natural growth, half are people that move here, businesses, that's going to become more of an issue. More of an issue even as you move back to the east. It's not just a West Texas issue or a South Texas issue. It's dealing with more of the state. And so making sure that we have resources to be able to deal with new technological capabilities and ability for finding more efficient ways to using water conservation, you name it. So I do think that's an important piece. When I was in the Senate, it was a top priority of mine. It continues to be one that I think is really important, that the state has to, but that also is a relationship between we as the state taxpayers and we as local taxpayers, and so typically that's the way those major dollars are looked at, is there's partnerships, and it's not just one person rowing the boat, it's multiple people rowing the boat, or multiple entities rowing the boat, which is how we get there.
Okay, so what happens in the next 6 months, or let me pose it this way: What could be the biggest roadblock in the next 6 months to cause this to be, to end the session with maybe a less rosy estimate for where we're heading?
Yeah, good question. You were going to ask what happens in 6 months, and I was like, well, hell, they leave. That's what's going to happen, and then we get to go back to work. So anyway, but never mind. You changed the question on me. There can be a wide variety of things. There could be. Unfortunately, there's some very tragic wars that are going on in part of the world right now, very devastating to those communities, those regions, and those families. That obviously can be one that can quickly change the dynamic of global economic trade in this country and other countries. Those are one. There can be economic downturns. What are China's economic numbers? Are they real numbers? Are they not real numbers? There was I think one of their economists was here I think here in our country not too long ago and questioned that, and I don't think he's got a job anymore. So they're not real prone to providing their information and their data, but they are a very large economy in the world. So there can be certain things, there can be famines that happen around the world. There can be, devastating disasters. I mean, think about all of our fellow Americans that are over in California and LA right now. I mean, that is just devastating. And what that can have to a disruption in not just their economy, but, the economy of the U.S. So there's a lot of several factors that could happen. There can be that global economic downturn or recession that we know will happen. We don't know when or what the trajectory is. So there's a lot of different factors. But then there also can be the fact is the economy can overperform the basic assumptions that we have in this revenue estimate.
All right, I want to ask you, you are, of course, or might be involved in another major issue this legislative session, the conversation around school choice, vouchers, ESAs. Last session, the bill that passed out of the Senate would have housed the administration of that ESA system in your office.
We noticed that.
Yeah,
we noticed that.
Yeah,
we saw that part. Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate you reminding me, man.
I didn't know if I was going to break the news.
No, not
to you
breaking news.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
Do you expect that to happen again? And if so, what does that look like for your office and for Texans?
Yeah, it's last session at one point I called one of the legislators that was working on that. And there was an important issue that I thought we needed to have changed for us to be able to administer that program. And we chit-chat for a little while, you know, kind of how are you, how's this, how's that? And then they brought it up. And I said, well, I'm glad you brought that up. I said, you know, reality is, you know, governor wants that bill. I said, why don't you just let the governor administer it? And then they said something, and I said, well, you know, Mike Morath, a good friend of mine, he's got opinions. I said, just let Mike Morath administer that. And so we went through a few. I mean, I brought up all kinds of agencies, you know, like the funeral home and this one and that one. You know, I brought up all kinds of folks. And then finally he said, Glenn, that's not going to happen. You know where this is going to go. Okay, now, and I won't tell you what I said then. I used a few choice words from my old farming days. And I said, okay, I need you to listen to what I'm saying because your job is to pass it, but my job is to stand this up and make it work and administer it in a manner that the taxpayers expect. And so last session did give us the ability to work through a lot of those issues with the members of the legislature. And the times I do talk to them, they go, okay, we're going to talk about this, and you know it's still coming your way. And I was like, yes, I do. And they're like, and we're listening. And so we've been able to have some good conversations, and with some of the stakeholder groups that are either for, against, you name it, and trying to make sure that we are thinking through a lot of the unknowns. That's the part that would, you know, scare just whatever that may be. I mean, we have the broadband office. I can name all kinds of things they've given me, you know, the opioid fund council, whether it was years ago, the bullion depository. I mean, you know, but we've stood all these things up and making them work. And so we have a lot of experience in standing up new things. And so I feel confident in talking to stakeholders, with the members, also with other states, even though it may not be of scale. You know, we may have more students in our public school system than they have their entire state of whatever state it is. But with that being said, to try to figure out what are some of those issues that we can hit the ground running and work through that to get it to where the taxpayer would be proud of the program we're running.
Yeah, I believe the way it was sort of written last session, at least in the Senate, was you would contract with a vendor or multiple vendors to sort of administer the program. They would handle dispersing the money to you know, they would essentially be in control of the money and disperse it.
And it's important that it goes to where the child is going, not into your pocket. It's important that it goes to the institution of education. You know that. So there's some real important pieces to make sure that, one, you can administer it, two, you can account for the dollars, and you make sure the flow of those dollars.
And also, I would imagine keeping out fraud. Or
that is right. That is right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
How big of an endeavor of this? How much does that change the makeup and operations of your agency?
Yeah, I mean it's you know, just same as any new program they've given us. I mean, I wouldn't be being quite honest sitting up here as I may wake up in the middle of the night and just go, oh shit. My wife's, are you okay? Do we need to go to the hospital? No, I was thinking about administering this program that the legislature is about to give me. She's like, oh, we'll just go back to bed. You know, it's kind of old hat now. You know, we've done that several times. Break up in sweats and be like, oh my gosh, how are we going to do this? But you know, I got total faith in my team. I mean, I am very proud of the people that I have in the agency that help me run the agency in exec and in the divisions. You know, it is some very professional people that try to methodically think through, and we game through these scenarios. And so while yes, a new program, you know, scares you to death some days because it's new. You know, you're inventing A, B, and C, right? You know, it's like when the legislature gave me, oh, Glenn, just go find those, you know, financial institutions that are boycotting the oil and gas industry. Oh, thanks. I'm going to go to the local retail store and just buy the program and plug it in. I mean, it didn't exist. No one had ever done it before. So you got to come up with this whole methodology, and you got to tell people, like, this is how you get on and how you get off. So these are not easy things to do. They're hard. They're really hard work, but I got total faith in the people that I have. We're going to be able to make it work.
You've been in the legislature. You can, I think, count votes.
I still have PTSD, so thanks for reminding me.
I mean, it seems like there's a very good chance that this thing's going to happen this session. Is there anything that you're telling lawmakers that, you know, you need to make sure that this part looks like this, or
one of the things is make sure we have flexibility. One of the things I was mentioning to you earlier is that, for example, I think one version said, you shall have a vendor. No. I want to have multiple options. I need to have options. I need to have flexibility to make sure that something that we haven't thought about, that nobody brought up to us, there's going to be a curveball. There always is in life, right? That's part of the challenge of life. That's the issue. That's the fun, is trying to work through those. And so giving us that tool where we can redirect and figure out whatever that, if we're so pigeonholed, then that could become a domino effect to something else. And that's what you don't want to have happen. Because I do know, we'll deal with that next session. Yeah, well, I've heard that a lot, but the probability of it coming back and fixing it, while you do fix some, if we can, let's do it right the first time, let's do it right the first time.
All right, I'll ask one more question, and then we'll go to the audience questions. And it's one that I feel compelled to ask. People may have noticed that both of us up here are wearing Aggie rings. The current chancellor of A&M.
Oh, I thought you were going to ask me about the football game the other day.
No, I'm trying not to talk about that right now. But the current chancellor of A&M, a former controller. You, of course, are an Aggie current controller. The current chancellor of A&M is retiring soon. Is that a job that you would be interested in at all?
The thing is, you're the first person to ask me that. No one's asked me that question. Oh, my gosh. I tell you, it has been a little... it was a little silly come almost a year ago now, these rumors and, Glenn, and then people are texting me like, so you're leaving next week. I was like, go where? Like, what am I going to do? This is John Sharp's job. You know how this place is. This place is, oh my gosh, the rumors are just kind of silly. With that, I have my job. I love my team. I love my job. When I take an oath to do a particular job, I take it real serious. When I got in this role 10 years ago, I went around to division, to office. And part of that is I wanted to hear what my employees had to say. I wanted to see them face to face, even if you spend a few minutes. But I also wanted them to know I'm not just some politician that ran for this. I'm here to do my job. That also means you're here to do your job. And so there were several reasons I did that. Would that be a job that, wearing this ring or thinking and wanting to continue in public service that I would think that I would hope to be able to do someday? Yeah. I wouldn't be honest if I was sitting here, and it's easier just to be honest with everybody. But, that's not necessarily one that I envision today. So right now, I'm focused on doing my job. That's Sharp's job. I feel like whoever they pick, they're going to pick the right person to lead the A&M university system into the future. And until then, I'm going to stay focused on what I'm doing.
All right, let's go to Matt, who will have some questions from the audience.
Hopefully he has an easier question.
So just as a reminder for our in-person audience, just because of the full house here, you can submit your questions online, texastribune.org/ask. Anyone here with a phone, my colleague, James in the back also has a paper with a QR code if you want to scan that and ask your questions that way. So we have a question. Sam from Allen asks, is there a possibility with the surplus that an effort will be taken to reform and eventually eliminate recapture from public school districts?
So recapture is a big issue. That's one that I do hear quite a bit about, especially as certain communities. If those of you that don't know, and most of you are very educated, that means that a certain percentage in higher property tax districts, a percentage of that goes back to the state and redistributed across all the other school districts. And so there are more school districts in recapture than have been in the past. That is something that we hear about a lot, but that's also one of the reasons that there is the effort in the last several sessions in rate compression to try to combat that issue and reduce that down.
This person asks, is the Comptroller's office engaged in data modernization efforts to provide more accurate and timely labor market information for policymakers?
Yeah, so we're always looking at ways that we can have better information and more real-time information with the legislature and the public.
Matthew from Dallas writes, in relation to Texas's qualified hotel project rebate programs, let's see here. Give me 1 second. What can you share with us regarding modifications or refinements being explored in the upcoming legislative session?
Ooh, the legislature always talks about that issue, even when they have said we're not going to deal with that anymore. They usually do, whether there's an expansion of this city, that city for this project or that project can qualify. Now, whether they make any adjustments to the overall program, I'm not really sure, but usually there's an addition of projects or two that they add in that can qualify for that program.
Rebecca from Dallas asks, speaking of administering programs, can you shed some light on the sunsetting if the R&D tax credit and efforts being made to renew it this season?
Yeah, so my office, working with some different interest groups, are trying to, this legislative session, possibly simplify what the R&D program is here in the state of Texas. And so if that can get passed, that would be easier, in my opinion, for both the companies and also my office in the way that program is administered.
These are some graduate level questions here.
Yes,
right?
yes. I just hope I'm providing graduate answers.
Karen from Austin asks, isn't part of the carryover the failure to adequately fund public education?
So that's a loaded question. You know, that I think if you look at the state provides a significant amount of dollars into public education. Obviously, public education is more than just reading, writing, arithmetic. What school districts are asked to do for public safety and all types of different things is pretty enormous. If anybody else, in this room, if nothing else you get for this, I do ask for your prayers, because I continue to have a 19-year-old daughter, a 16-year-old daughter, and a 16-year-old son. So I got 3 teenagers, I got car insurance, I got cars, but the point is I have kids in the public education system, and you know, the fact is what schools have to deal with is pretty immense. But with that being said, I don't think the state has failed in its responsibilities in funding public education.
I want to just ask a follow-up question on that. As we talked about before, there was a desire to get $4.5 billion more than what was allocated last session. There presumably will continue to be that desire if they can get that through. How quickly can the legislature get that money to the schools, realistically?
Realistically, even if the legislature came in, passed it, they passed the budget, which is where it's going to be. The budget's going to get wrapped up towards the end of session. But schools are going to go through their budgeting process starting in the back end of the spring, end of spring, beginning of summer, and set their budgets. And so realistically, this would be put into place in the next budget cycle because their budgets are set. And that's one reason that once we got into this fiscal year, I might as well make sure to add that back in my cost carryover balance, because the reality is they're not going to get to implement that.
Larry from Austin first states the surplus is an accounting illusion, but his question, would you outline needs which offset the so-called surplus, such as plugging abandoned oil wells, water infrastructure, and pension?
Yeah, so there's a wide variety of things the legislature can or can't do with those funds, and those are the things that they're going to have discussions about this policy session.
Well, we are through questions that are submitted online. Matthew, I don't know if you have any other questions yourself.
Right. Well, I think, you know, we got you through the ringer. So
that is awesome, because we will give everybody back almost 7 minutes and 30 seconds of their life.
Wonderful. All right. Well, you know, I want to say just to the crowd, we thank you all for being here. It's a great crowd, very engaged questions. I also want to just say, you know, we will be doing a lot of events here in this site throughout the legislative session. We have House Democratic Caucus Chair Jean Wu coming up in a couple weeks. Charles Perry, the aforementioned Charles Perry, leading the charge on water and other things coming up as well. So keep track, texastribune.org/events. Check out the Texas Tribune podcast, and we'll have a lot more great discussion coming forward. But thank you all for being here today, and thank you for being here as well.